Right now we're actually on a guard tower that used to be part of the partisan camp of the Maccabees. You know, these Judean guerrillas from about 2,000 years ago who led a revolt against the Syrian Greeks when they occupied our country. So this mountain in particular is important to our people for a number of reasons. Historically, it's very significant. We believe this to be the mountain where our ancestor Yaakov, Israel, had his famous dream with the ladder and the malachim, what's often translated into English as angels, ascending and descending the ladder. This is where one of our ancient kings, Yeravam ben Nevat, built the temple in the golden calf in order to entice our people away from Jerusalem. When the Maccabees began our guerrilla war against the Syrian Greeks, it was a very difficult war that lasted roughly 26 years. This became the headquarters here in Gofna. This became the headquarters of the Maccabees. The Adon Matityahu ben Yochanan Kohen Gadol, he died on this mountain, peace be upon him. And also just over there, his son, Yehuda Maccabee, Judah Maccabee, as he's known in the West, was killed in battle just over there under Harb al-Chatzor. Lots of history on this mountain. It's actually pretty inspiring to live here and to be able to come to this guard tower and remind myself that only not so long ago, you know, there were people doing guard duty here who didn't know if they hadn't made the biggest mistake of Jewish history, not knowing if a battalion of Greeks with war elephants weren't about to come from around one of these mountains and just destroy everything that we were trying to build. And here we are, thousands of years later, feeling like characters in later chapters of the same story that they were characters in. And I think for those who pay attention to what's happening here in the Middle East, it's important to understand the story that the Jewish people understand ourselves to be living in. To understand what motivates us to live in places like this in the West Bank. We're not so far from Ramallah. In fact, this mountain is surrounded by different Palestinian communities. A lot of my work is focused on really bringing the Jews who live out here in the West Bank together with a lot of their Palestinian neighbors in order to be able to understand the stories of the other and Be'ezrat Hashem to work towards a shared struggle that allows us to both feel like winners in the stories we're living in. Because at the end of the day, the Jews and the Palestinians are living in two completely different stories. We've been living in two completely different conflicts for the last 100 years. And more than fighting one another, we've really been fighting past one another. We've been fighting past each other, fighting our fantasies of the other. And we really, once we understand the grievances and aspirations of each party of the conflict, it becomes possible to create a larger narrative that's inclusive enough to encompass both ostensibly rival narratives. It's important to emphasize that when we come back to places like this, and for us it's coming back, I think the broadest common denominator that every Jew in the West Bank subscribes to ideologically is that we're a proud ancient people from these mountains. We were uprooted unjustly against our will by the Romans after we beat the Greeks. And somehow, against our odds, we managed to come back 2,000 years later, and we feel that the international community is trying to uproot us again. And the only way we know how to resist that is to come to as many of these mountains as possible and build Jewish communities to make it logistically impossible to move us again. That being said, the reality that Palestinians are living in under military occupation that controls almost every aspect of their lives on a daily basis is not just, and not an expression of our values. If we came back here to establish a Jewish state, that state should be expressing our values in its policies and in its institutions, and that includes how non-Jews are experiencing living in this country. So on the one hand, we return to our home, but on the other hand, the Americans and their allies don't want us here. But on the other hand, we, from just a purely, military perspective, our security establishment claim that we need these mountains to defend ourselves. But on the other hand, we have all these non-Jews who live here, and we're not sure if we can incorporate them into our society or not. So for the last 51 years, we've done everything and nothing. So now we have to, it's time, 51 years already, over half a century, it's time that we clarify for ourselves what we're doing here, make it clear that we're not leaving, that there's not going to be a two-state solution, we're not going to divide this land, that both our peoples are deeply connected to this land, and we're even deeply connected to values that we don't realize we share. We came back to life after 2,000 years in order to change the world, in order to inspire the world like we did once upon a time when we were sovereign here thousands of years ago. We gave the world so many new ideas that shaped the direction that mankind evolved in. And I really do believe that if we came back to life after 2,000 years of essentially being a national ghost, we came back to life in order to do that again. And in order for us to do that again, we have to figure out our identity. We have to stop trying to be an outpost of Western civilization in the Middle East. We have to stop trying to be a client state of the United States and its allies. And we have to start asking ourselves, what does Hebrew civilization look like in the 21st century?